Conrad Parrish did not pause his conversation when his wife walked through the front door. He was sitting on the couch she had chosen, in the house she had decorated, holding a glass of wine she would never have touched. And next to him, curled into the space that had always been Nell's, was a woman named Bianca, laughing softly at something Conrad had just said. Her fingers were resting near the pearl brooch pinned to her blouse, the pearl brooch. Nell Hartley stopped in the doorway. She had been at St. Vincent's Medical Center until 11:30, sitting, with her younger brother through his 4th round of physical therapy in 6 months. Her coat was damp, her feet ached, and her eyes found that brooch the way they always found it, automatically, the way you find north. Her grandmother had pressed it into her hand 4 hours before she died. Nell had been 22. She could still feel the cold of the metal and the papery warmth of the hand beneath it. "Wear this," her grandmother had said quietly, "on the day you know you've won." It had lived in a velvet pouch in Nell's jewelry drawer for 14 years. She had never worn it because she had never felt like she had won anything. Not until this moment, oddly enough, standing frozen in her own doorway. "Nell!" Conrad looked up, and there was not a flicker of guilt in his expression. Just mild annoyance, the way you look at a delivery person who has rung the bell twice. "I didn't realize Cade's PT runs late on Thursdays, doesn't it?" He knew his wife's brother's therapy schedule. He just hadn't bothered to check it tonight. "Bianca," he said, glancing beside him, "this is my wife." And Bianca smiled. It was the kind of smile that knows exactly what it is doing. She settled deeper into the cushions, let one hand drift close to Conrad's knee and said, "I've heard so much about you." Then she reached up and touched the brooch, straightened it casually, the way you adjust something that belongs to you. That was the moment Nell understood everything. Not just the affair, not just the years of small humiliations at dinner parties, the jokes about the temp job where they had met. The way Conrad introduced her as the woman who got lucky at the right time. All of it arrived at once, the way water understands the shape of a stone after years of going quietly around it. "How long?" she said. It did not come out as a question. It came out like a diagnosis. Conrad tilted his head. "Does it really matter? You've been so consumed with Cade, running back and forth to that hospital like a second job. I have a life here, Nell. Needs that weren't being met." He said it so easily, as if he had rehearsed it, or had simply never worried about saying it out loud. "My grandmother gave me that brooch," Nell said. Bianca blinked. Conrad set down his glass. "The day she died," Nell continued, "she pressed it into my hand in the hospital and told me to wear it. When I knew I'd won something, it's been in a drawer for 14 years because I never felt like I had earned it." She looked at Bianca, not with anger, with something far quieter. "I think I was wrong about when that day was." She crossed the room. Bianca leaned back instinctively, and Nell reached down and unclasped the brooch herself with both hands, the way you hold something that belongs to the dead. She set it in her palm, closed her fingers around it. "You should have called," Conrad said. And there was something new in his voice, a thin edge of something almost like uncertainty. "If you'd called, I would have." "You would have what?" Nell asked. There was no heat in it. She was genuinely curious. He didn't finish the sentence. "I'm leaving," she said. "Nell," he stood. "Don't be dramatic. Let's talk in the morning." "This isn't dramatic," she said. "Dramatic would be staying." She turned toward the hallway. "I'll get my things." "And go where?" His voice hardened. He had always been most comfortable when he was certain. "Everything in this house has my name on it. The accounts, the car, all of it. I built everything you have access to. You came to me with student debt and a sick brother and a temp job. You walk out that door, you go right back to that." She went still, facing the hallway wall, and then she turned slowly and looked at him one last time. What was in her face was not anger and not grief. It was the calm that lives on the other side of a very long decision. 6 years, she said, and that is genuinely what you think. It's what I know. Then I hope what comes next teaches you something, she said quietly. Because these last 6 years just taught me everything I needed to know. She was upstairs for 11 minutes. She came back down with a single bag, the same weathered duffel she had brought into his house 6 years ago, and her grandmother's brooch held in her coat pocket. She did not take the jewelry he had bought her. She did not take the cashmere coats or the monogrammed luggage. She took the duffel, her own laptop, and a small framed photograph of her brother from the shelf in the hallway. Conrad was still standing in the living room when she passed. She did not look at him again. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something. If you believe that a person's worth has nothing to do with what someone else decided to rescue them from, take 1 second right now and subscribe to this channel. Stay with me until the very end, because what happens next is the kind of story I think about for a long time after it's over. And leave me a comment with the name of the city where you're watching from right now. I want to know how far this story traveled. Because what Conrad Parrish did not know that night, standing in his living room while the wine went flat and Bianca quietly gathered her things, was that the woman walking into the October cold was not who he had always believed she was. He had never once asked. In 6 years, he had never asked, and that was going to cost him more than he could possibly calculate. To understand what came next, you have to understand the woman Conrad thought he knew. Nell Hartley was born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to a father who read scientific journals the way other men read box scores, and a mother who had died of a cerebral aneurysm when Nell was 9. After that, it was her father, her younger brother Cade, and her 3 people in a house full of books, building something sturdy out of loss. Her father, Warren Hartley, was not a name that appeared on magazine covers. He had worked carefully and quietly for 30 years, and his early investments had shaped the pharmaceutical landscape in ways that other people got credit for publicly. He believed the best scientists were the ones who did not need the spotlight. He raised his daughter accordingly. Nell earned a full scholarship to Johns Hopkins at 17. By 24, she had a doctorate in neuroscience and a research patent that 3 major pharmaceutical companies were watching closely. Her dissertation committee had used the word generational and meant it without qualification. And then her brother called from a parking lot in Delaware, and the motorcycle, and the spinal cord injury that should have been fatal and wasn't, but required the kind of sustained rehabilitation that dismantles bank accounts and breaks the people paying them. Nell did not hesitate. She knew exactly what she was walking away from. She walked away, anyway, because the equation was simple to her. A career was something that could be rebuilt. A brother could not be replaced. She moved back to Pennsylvania. She worked temp contracts. She filed the research patents quietly, almost as an afterthought, the way you put something valuable in a drawer and close it until the right time comes. She paid Cade's bills. She sat with him through every therapy session and celebrated every inch of progress and read to him at night from the journals their father had left on the shelves. Warren Hartley died of a heart attack 2 years later, before Cade could walk again. Before Nell could show him that she had held everything together. What Warren left behind was a portfolio that her attorney described very carefully as substantially larger than most people encounter in their lifetime. The investments had compounded over 3 decades. The number had more zeros than Nell had emotionally prepared for. She sat in his office for a long time without speaking, and then she asked him to hold everything in trust, manage it conservatively, and contact her only when she was ready. She was not ready for a long time. It was during those temp months, quiet and tired and grief-heavy, that she met Conrad. He came into the law firm where she was covering reception, confident and large in the room, and he saw her and decided something about her almost immediately. She could see the exact moment it happened. She had always been perceptive about the moment. Someone decided what you were. He courted her and she said yes, because grief has a way of making warmth feel like oxygen, and Conrad had been genuinely warm in the beginning. He wanted to lift something up. He wanted to be the reason something changed. She understood the impulse even as she watched it work on her. She did not tell him about Hopkins. At first because it felt like another world, A life set aside so completely that mentioning it seemed like showing someone a photograph of a room you no longer lived in. Later, she did not tell him because she understood, quietly and without drama, that Conrad's love was structured around a particular story. She was the woman he had found. The thing that said something generous about him. The moment she complicated the story, she would become something harder to love. So she waited. Year by year, she told herself she was being patient, that the man she had glimpsed early on, the one who had held her hand at Cade's bedside the first time they visited together, was still in there, beneath the habits of success. She waited 6 years, and he never showed up. The night she walked out, she went 4 blocks in the cold before stopping under the entrance of a parking garage and pulling a phone from her coat pocket. Not the phone Conrad paid for, a different one, plain, with 4 contacts saved in it. She called the second one. Nell. The voice was warm and alert, the voice of someone who does not ask why you are calling at midnight. "I've been expecting to hear from you." Lev Karas had been her father's attorney and then hers. He had managed the trust for 6 years. He had filed documents on her behalf, quietly, including, 17 months ago, the first share transfers into a holding company, whose name appeared nowhere near her own. "The FDA review," she said. "The final committee report is in 8 days, Lev said. "Your projections were right. The team is calling it unanimous." 2 years into her marriage, during a stretch of empty evenings when Conrad was traveling and she was alone at the small desk in the corner of the reading room, she had quietly reconnected with 2 former colleagues from her doctoral work. They had taken her original research and kept building. She had funded it through the trust, a careful and invisible allocation. She had not told Conrad, not out of deception, but because she had learned that sharing the things she cared about most with someone who could not see them was like handing someone a compass who had no interest in direction. The compound targeted a specific mechanism in early-stage neurodegeneration. The results, according to one pre-review editor who had been shown the data privately, were the kind of finding that makes a field stop and ask how we missed this for 20 years. "Start everything," Nell said. "All of it. All of it," she said. "The announcement, the licensing talks, the board letter." She looked out at the street, at the cold light on the wet pavement, and for the first time, in years, felt a weight lift from the center of her chest. "I've been ready for 2 years. He just gave me a reason to stop pretending otherwise." On the other end of the line, Lev Karas opened a folder he had kept prepared for a very long time and began to work. Conrad told himself she would come back within the week. He said this while pouring coffee, alone in the morning, while sitting through board meetings without absorbing anything, while checking his phone for messages that never came. He said it to himself, the way a man says things that have already stopped being true. By the 10th day, the silence had changed its shape. It no longer felt like sulking. It had the quality of a door that had been carefully, thoroughly closed from the other side. He hired an investigator, Hugo Strand, one of the best in the city. "Find my wife," he said. "Where she is, who she's with, and what she has." Hugo called back in 14 hours. He did not start with where she was. "Mr. Parrish," he said, "how much do you know about your wife's education?" Conrad almost laughed. "Enough. She was working a reception desk when I met her. We never really discussed the details." "Mr. Parrish," Hugo said carefully, "your wife holds a doctorate from Johns Hopkins University, neuroscience. She graduated in the top percentile of her cohort. There is a research patent in her name, filed 8 years ago, currently awaiting FDA approval. The pharmaceutical community is expecting that approval within the next 2 weeks. They are calling it the biggest development in neurology in 3 decades. The room went very far away. "That's not," Conrad started. "There's more," Hugo said. "Her father was Warren Hartley." The name arrived like a weight dropped from a height. Warren Hartley, a man Conrad had cited in shareholder presentations, a man whose early portfolio decisions had become industry case studies, a man who, as far as Conrad had known, had died quietly and left no notable heirs. "She inherited his portfolio," Hugo continued, "held in trust. conservative estimates based on asset class and growth period. We're looking at north of $400 million. And she never touched it. Not for personal use, not once in 6 years. Conrad sat down. He had not decided to. His legs simply stopped working. She had all of this, he said slowly, the entire time we were married. Yes, sir. And she stayed. Yes. Why would she? He stopped. He could not finish the question out loud because finishing it required saying everything he had done to her. That's not my department, Hugo said quietly. But in 20 years of this work, Mr. Parrish, the only reason a woman hides a fortune from the man she married is because she wanted to find out something that the money would have made impossible to know. A long pause. There's one more thing, Hugo said. Someone has been quietly acquiring shares in Parrish Distribution over the past 18 months. Small blocks, rotating holding companies. We traced the chain this morning. Conrad already knew. Before Hugo said it, he already knew. 14%, Hugo said. Enough for a formal board seat. She filed the shareholder request this morning. Conrad held the phone against his ear for a long time after the call ended. He walked through the house slowly. Room by room, the way you walk through a place you are only now truly seeing. He found her bookshelf in the study. He had always assumed the titles were decorative. He pulled one down and found her handwriting in the margins throughout, sharp, confident, disagreeing with the authors on multiple pages. He found the small desk in the corner of the reading room, the one she had used on late evenings when he was already in bed. He opened the drawer. Inside was a notebook. He almost closed it. He did not. Most of the pages were dense with equations and diagrams he could not follow. But near the middle, between 2 pages of research notes, there was a single paragraph written in her quick handwriting, and it stopped him completely. He asked me tonight what I work on at this desk. I told him it was just old research, nothing current. He nodded and moved on to his Tokyo numbers. I sat here for a while after he went upstairs and I thought, he has no idea. He walks past this desk every single day and has no idea what is on it. And I don't know anymore if that is the saddest thing I have ever known, or the thing that has kept me from disappearing entirely into who he needs me to be. This desk is the only place in this house where I get to be myself. Conrad set the notebook down on the desk and sat in her chair and stayed there for a very long time. He dismissed Bianca that evening. She was cold about it, then gone, out the door with her bags, and a backward look that told him she had already calculated her next move before the conversation ended. He did not blame her. They had both understood the terms, even if they had not spoken them. He sat alone in the house for a week, and then his assistant knocked on his office door and turned on the television, and Conrad's entire world shifted on its axis. The press conference was in Chicago. The room was packed reporters, analysts, researchers who had followed the compound trials for 3 years, and at the front of the room, standing at the podium with no notes and no visible nerves, was Nell. She was wearing a dark blazer and her grandmother's pearl brooch at the collar. She spoke for 40 minutes without stumbling. She explained the mechanism of the drug in language that was precise without being impenetrable. She answered questions from researchers who were visibly struggling to contain their reactions. At one point, a woman in the 3rd row, a clinical neurologist whose name appeared on a shelf's worth of textbooks, raised her hand and said, "Dr. Hartley, can you speak to the implications for early onset presentations?" And the entire room went briefly, instinctively quiet. Dr. Hartley. Conrad's assistant said something to him. He could not hear it. A reporter called out, "Dr. Hartley, there are reports of distribution negotiations with several major pharmaceutical firms, including companies with ties to Parrish Industries." Any comment? Nell looked directly into the camera just for a moment. The way you look at something, you have already made your peace with. "My only comment right now," she said, "is about what this compound can do for patients. The business conversations will happen in the appropriate rooms." His phone was ringing before the press conference ended. His board member, Cressida Hale, was through his office door within the hour. her expression the careful neutral of someone who has already done the math. "The shareholders have been calling since this morning," she said, "and she's requested a formal board meeting." Filed through her attorney, she paused. "Conrad, 4 of the 7 board members have already told me they plan to hear her out." The board meeting was on a Wednesday. Every seat was taken when Nell arrived, plus a row of attorneys along the wall. Conrad sat at the head of the table out of habit. When Nell walked in carrying a slim folio, the room went quiet in a way that Conrad recognized as involuntary. These were not people who impressed easily, and yet they sat up when she entered, the way people sit up in the presence of something they cannot quite categorize. She greeted Cressida first. Cressida nodded back with something close to respect. "Thank you for seeing me," Nell said. She took the empty seat at the far end of the table, directly across from Conrad, the full length of the table between them. "I'll be brief." She was not brief exactly. She was thorough. She presented a complete analysis of parish distribution's declining R&D partnerships, its lost contracts, its aging infrastructure. Not as an accusation, as a diagnosis. Her voice stayed level throughout. "This company has good people," she said near the end. "With the right licensing arrangement, exclusive regional rights for the compound in North America. Parish distribution doesn't just stabilize. It becomes one of the most critical pharmaceutical distribution entities in the country within 5 years." Cressida leaned forward. "Your conditions?" "1," Nell said, "new leadership at the CEO level." She looked at Conrad then, directly and without looking away. "This is not personal," she said. "I need everyone in this room to understand that. The data in this analysis predates my departure from this marriage by 4 years. The decline has been consistent and measurable. I would make this exact recommendation if Conrad Parrish were a stranger to me. The personal history makes this room uncomfortable. It does not make the assessment incorrect." The board went to deliberate. Conrad waited in the hallway. 45 minutes. He did not look at his phone. He thought about a desk he had walked past for 6 years, and never once looked at. When they called him back in, Cressida delivered the decision. They had accepted Nell's proposal. He would step down as CEO. An advisory role had been offered as part of the transition structure. "Dr. Hartley asked us to extend that offer," Cressida said. Conrad looked across the table at Nell. "You asked them to keep me on," he said. "I asked them not to discard you," she said. "There's a difference." "Why?" She was still for a moment, then she stood, and what was in her face was not triumph and was not pity. It was simply honest. "Because I remember what it felt like to be told I was nothing," she said, "and I decided, a long time ago, that I would never do that to another person, not even to someone who did it to me." She picked up her portfolio. "Take the advisory seat. Do the work. Learn to look at the people beside you and actually see them. That is not mercy, Conrad. That is just what a decent life requires." She moved toward the door. "Nell," he said, his voice broke on her name. "Did you ever love me? Was any of it real?" She stopped. A long moment passed. "All of it was real," she said quietly. "I loved you in a way I am honestly still a little embarrassed by. I loved a version of you that I kept waiting to become permanent." She paused. "You loved a version of me that you invented in a law firm lobby and never bothered to revise. We were both holding pictures of people who didn't exist. The difference is I knew it and stayed anyway, still hoping. You never even knew enough to hope." She put her hand on the door. "Ask the next person," she said. "Whoever is beside you next. Ask them who they are. Don't wait for them to prove it to you. Just ask." And then she walked out, back into the afternoon light, back into the life that had been building itself patiently while she kept it in a drawer. The months that followed were quiet for Conrad and vast for Nell. The compound received full FDA approval 6 weeks after the board meeting. The first clinical outcomes from early adopter hospitals were described by researchers as results they had not let themselves predict because they had not wanted to be wrong. She hired 140 people in the first year, and then 200 more. She built her primary facility in a mid-sized Ohio city that had lost a manufacturing plant 3 years prior. When reporters asked her why Ohio, she said, Because my brother lives there, and because the people who need good work the most are rarely the ones who get offered it. Cade stood for the entire ribbon-cutting ceremony. Nell wore the brooch. Conrad, for his part, accepted the advisory seat. He sat at the far end of the table, where he had once sat at the head, and he did the hardest thing he had ever done. He stayed when everything in him said to leave. He mentored younger executives and discovered, to his own surprise, that he was good at it. Perhaps because he had learned every mistake a leader could make from the inside. He never remarried. He told the one person who asked that he had spent 6 years next to someone extraordinary and had not had the curiosity to find out why, that it had become a kind of standard he could not unknow. He read her published papers. He did not understand most of them. He read them anyway. They saw each other at industry events twice a year, and every time Conrad treated her with a careful, unperforming respect, and she returned it with a warmth that surprised everyone who knew their history. They had become, against all reason, two people who understood each other, too late for what it might have meant, but not too late to mean something. At one such event, a year after the board meeting, a young researcher worked up the nerve to ask Nell, "Was there ever a moment when someone told you that you were defined by your worst circumstances? That you wouldn't amount to much?" Nell was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "someone told me exactly that, and I want you to hear this, because I wish someone had said it to me when I was standing where you are standing." She turned to face the young woman fully. "The person who tells you what you will never become is describing the ceiling of their own imagination, not yours. Don't let someone else's limited vision become the limit of your life." I almost did. It was the closest I ever came to a mistake I couldn't find my way back from. That evening, in a quiet office across the city, Conrad watched the clip on his phone and did not look away. He thought about a pearl brooch, about a desk he had never asked about 6 years of walking past an extraordinary mind and choosing every single morning not to be curious. He thought about the question he had never asked, the only one that had ever mattered. "Who are you?" It was too late to ask it of her. He understood that completely and without argument. But he made a smaller decision in that moment, the only one still available to him, that he would spend whatever time he had left being a person who asked it of everyone else. It was not redemption. It was not close to that. It was simply a man, sitting alone, in a room full of things he decided at last to be curious about the people inside his own life before they were gone. There is a moment Nell returned to often, in the years that followed, when the building had emptied, and she was alone with the quiet. She thought about walking into her own living room and finding a stranger wearing her grandmother's brooch. She thought about the cold of the metal in her palm. When she unclasped it and took it back, she thought about what her grandmother had said, and what she had only recently understood it to mean. Wear it on the day you know you've won. Winning was not what you took from someone else. It was not a boardroom or a company or a contract. It was the moment you stopped asking for permission to be what you had always been. It was the look on her brother's face at a ribbon cutting in Ohio. It was the young woman who walked away from a conversation with different eyes than she had arrived with. That was what her grandmother had meant, and Nell understood it now, standing in a building she had built with her own name above the door and her grandmother's brooch at her collar. They could take the house. They could take 6 years of mornings and replace them with some more agreeable. But what she carried in her own mind, what she had built at a small desk while the rest of the house slept, that had always been hers. It had waited for her in a drawer. It had outlasted every person who had decided what she was. It had been there, undiminished the entire time, the way important things always are. She had simply finally worn it.